Welcome everyone to follow the lecture on rock music and its recent developments in the People's Republic of China. My name is Veli-Matti Palomäki. I'm currently working as the program manager at the Nordic Center at Fudan University, and I did both my bachelor's and master's in East Asian Studies at the University of Helsinki, where I had a very special interest towards Chinese music, Chinese popular music, Chinese rock music. And also I've been quite actively involved in the music scene here in Shanghai, being a singer-songwriter, having written my own material since 2004, been playing a lot of solo shows and also with a band here in Shanghai. So of course I'm very familiar with the scene in that way as well. All right, so to start from the beginning of the journey of Chinese rock, we go back to the mid-1980s. And I think we should start with the definition of the actual word or the actual genre of rock music in the Chinese context. So if we go back to the early 1990s, the term yaogun, which is very literally translated to rock and roll, and another term that's tongsu, were sort of viewed as the opposites in the spectrum of Chinese popular music. And quoting Andrew F. Jones, they were produced, distributed, and performed in fundamentally divergent ways and discussed by musicians, fans, and critics altogether in different terms. So this quote is by Andrew F. Jones from his book Like a Knife from 1992. And those of you who are interested in the topic should definitely look for this book. It is a very important book on Chinese rock from the early 90s. So at the time, if we compare yaogun and tongsu, tongsu was viewed as this officially sanctioned popular music, and yaogun, very much its counterpart, was this more of a underground rock music, and the word here is independent by definition. Right now, the situation is a little bit different. Tongsu is very seldomly used nowadays. So if we talk about popular music in the sort of from a wider perspective, it's usually called 流行音乐. Nowadays, really means popular music. And yaogun in certain ways can also be sort of a viewed as a subcategory to 流行音乐. And of course, while sometimes still 流行音乐, 摇滚音乐, so pop and rock, they do have a difference in the modern context as well, but the difference is definitely not what it was back in the late 80s, early 90s, mid 90s. And now if we go back in history to the mid 1980s, so we can very easily sort of pinpoint the birth of Chinese rock music. First of all, we have to go even further back, so let's say to the late 1970s. So of course there was a long period of time where most of what the people in mainland China, in the People's Republic of China, were able to listen to were this revolutionary songs, so to speak. And then came the gradual opening up of China in the late 1970s, and the listeners suddenly had influence from very different kinds of musical styles. So what was very popular at the time were pop music from Hong Kong and Taiwan at the time. Chinese rock music is often seen as an evolution of a style of music called the Northwest Wind, or 西北风 in Chinese, which can be called a combination of northern Chinese folk melodies with rock instrumentation. And the artist who is often credited as the father or godfather of Chinese rock music, Cui Jian, was originally labeled a Northwest Wind artist, since rock music was not really existing in China at the time. So at the time it was Cui Jian, and even more specifically his song 一无所有, that's often translated into English as Nothing to My Name, which was very first performed in 1986, is very specifically considered by many as the starting point of Chinese rock music. For those of you who are interested in this particular song, if you want to learn about why exactly it became such an influential song, why it was so significant in the history of Chinese popular music, where it was performed, and so on and so forth, of course, you can Google the name Iwusoyo, you can find a Wikipedia article, you can find all the information you want, and of course you can go to your streaming platform of your choice and have a listen to this song. So that's so it is one of the very most influential and important songs in Chinese popular music in the recent decades. And also the first album by Cui Jian, that's in English titled as Rock and Roll on the New Long March, that was released in 1989, is very widely acknowledged as the first mainland Chinese rock music album. Technically, it is not the first album by Cui Jian, but it's what he considers as his first real album, and in any case, the first actual rock music album. So Cui Jian is still actively performing today. He released his latest album in 2021 and is still playing shows around China. He has also played several shows in the past outside of China as well. The early 1990s has often been called sort of the golden age for Chinese rock music, for yaogun. There can be arguments both for and against. So those arguments for this statement would be that several bands that were established in the late 80s and then actively performing in the early 90s. Some of these include Tang Dynasty, Black Panther, and Cobra. So they were performing to very big audiences, and they had a very big sort of following. So they were really big artists at the time in China. And one thing, of course, that was very important for the bands and the artists playing rock music at the time to promote their music was major record deals with specifically a Taiwanese record label, Rock Records. So those artists who had the chance to record their music with Rock Records, they of course had a very big distribution channel, and those albums sold. Don't have specific numbers with me here right now, but they sold in very large numbers at the time. And of course, the production values for these records was also quite high. At the time, also, several Chinese bands had the chance to perform outside of China as well. So those are some of the arguments sort of for the early 90s being sort of this golden age of Chinese rock music. And as for sort of some counter arguments, even though there were a lot of bands that were doing quite well at the time, being quite popular, quite even famous, selling a lot of records, but still the overall number of shows or live music venues in China was still very small. And even though many of these artists became quite popular, the income generated from the music to the artists was not particularly high. And also the overall rock music scene in China was still quite underdeveloped at the time. On the next slide, you can see a cover image from a live release from a show in Hong Kong in 1994 with several Chinese rock artists performing to a very large audience. And this is arguably one of the most important live recordings of Chinese rock music, especially in its early times. When discussing the definition of Chinese rock music, one can also ask the question if there is anything particularly Chinese in Chinese rock music, or if it's simply rock music performed in China. If we look back at the early Chinese rock artists such as Cui Jian, even from the very early on, he added Chinese musical elements, Chinese musical instruments to his music to give it a very specifically, very particularly Chinese sound. And then we have artists like Tang Chao, like Tang Dynasty, which is also often called the first heavy metal band in China. So they were formed in 1988. So of course they take their name from the same period of Chinese history, and the music features a lot of different Chinese elements. There are also other bands, several other bands who add Chinese, sort of more traditional Chinese elements to their music. For example, Second Hand Rose, which was formed in 1999. They use a lot of elements from their own area of China where they're from. So Dongbei, the China's northeastern provinces. So they use a lot of elements in the language and also with traditional instruments. Of course, while we have several bands and several artists who do exactly this, they take more traditional elements and add it to rock music. But of course, the vast majority of rock musicians and rock bands in China, of course, do not do this. So in a general sense, if we talk about Chinese rock music, we should not have this sort of a requirement of having sort of a very natively Chinese elements in the music. Sometimes when we consciously add traditional Chinese elements to modern music, we have this term that's 中国风, which is like China style or China wave or China wind. So sometimes this term has been used to describe music that is very consciously adding Chinese traditional elements to modern music. Another thing that should be at least briefly mentioned is that sometimes these more traditional musical elements are not of Han Chinese origins. Of course, there are several minority groups in China, and one that has been particularly active and visible in the Chinese independent music scene or the Chinese rock music scene are the Mongols, the Mongolian minority. So there are several bands that have been quite popular in China and also outside of China, such as Hangai or Nine Treasures, that have many of their members are of the Mongolian minority. They add several Mongolian elements to their music, such as throat singing or traditional Mongolian instruments, and combine this with rock and metal music. Of course, the Mongolian minority isn't the only one to do this, but it's perhaps the most visible one. And these groups, these bands and artists have also been quite popular in China, even if they very often do not sing in Mandarin Chinese, but instead in Mongolian in this particular case. One topic that's sort of always been part of the discussion when we talk about Chinese rock, especially in the Western world, has been its coexistence with politics. So it is also a topic that we should at least give a brief look at. So of course, historically, when we go back to the late 1980s, and we take Cui Jian and his song Nothing to My Name or 一无所有, which played a role in what happened in 1989 in Beijing. So it has always been sort of a bit of a controversial song in China, despite being quite popular to this day. But if you look through the Chinese music streaming platforms, you are not able to find this particular song, whereas you're able to find almost all of Cui Jian's other songs. And this was, of course, to give one practical example of the situation, or how it has been and to a big extent still is. So of course, when we talk about rock music as a musical style, of course there are no sort of restrictions to performing rock music in China, but of course the same as with any genre of music or any form of art, there is a certain limit to what can be expressed in the lyrics. So of course this is why the vast majority of rock musicians, independent musicians, they do steer away from political topics just to avoid unnecessary trouble. And while this is of course the case most of the time, not always. So of course there are some artists who tend to be more straightforward in what they express, and they of course might face certain limitations on getting their music out there or getting their music blocked or cancelled in that way. And especially under the current Chinese leadership, there has been a renewed emphasis on promoting more traditional Chinese culture and adhering to party ideology in music as well. So there has been a bigger emphasis on these things in the recent recent past. And going back to the more historical sort of look on the development of Chinese rock music, and moving from the early 1990s to the late 1990s, we could see sort of the birth of the indie rock. So we would have record labels who would really drive this development. So first of all, we would have Modern Sky, that was established back in 1997 as what would be called China's first independent label, and which has now grown to be one of China's biggest music labels and also a major festival organizer. So today there are a lot of music festivals in China every year, and Modern Sky has been one of the biggest organizers of these music festivals. So from the late 1990s to the early 2000s, we saw the emergence of many new artists, a big sort of variation in musical style also. So new genres of rock music and what would then popularize the so-called indie rock. After Modern Sky, there were other smaller labels that were, you saw them popping up. So for instance, Maybe Mars, that was established exactly 10 years after Modern Sky in 2007. They released a lot of new and upcoming Chinese independent rock musicians and artists and bands. So in the very early days of Chinese rock music, as we mentioned at the very beginning of this lecture, so the difference between pop and rock was very obvious. So those two genres of music did not communicate at all. They were produced and distributed in totally different ways. They had very different audiences. But starting from the 2000s, the line between pop and rock has been blurring. So there are some rock musicians who have sort of crossed into the mainstream. One musician in particular is Wang Feng, who started as a rock musician with his band back in the mid to late 1990s. They released two albums with the band number 43 Baojie Street or Baojie 43号. And he then left the band around 2000 to start a solo career. And his solo career has been very popular. So he has become one of the most popular male singers in China. So he was the first one to really popularize this sort of popular rock music in China, starting from the early 2000s. So his influence in making rock music a mainstream genre of music was very important. However, if you listen to his songs, it is quite obvious that they have become less and less rock and more and more pop. So that's sort of the compromise that he has done. But he has been arguably the musician who has brought rock into the mainstream. After Wang Feng, another thing to really popularize rock music in China has been the television show and music competition called 乐队的夏天. Literally called Summer of Bands, going by the English official translation of The Big Band. This show has had a huge impact on the Chinese rock scene and how rock music and rock culture and bands are perceived and accepted by the mainstream. The show has served as a platform both for new and upcoming bands and older, very much already established bands. So several bands who have been around for a few decades have taken part in the competition to sort of find a new audience and become relevant or become relevant again. In 2019, the band New Pants or 新裤子 took part. The band was formed in 1996, though they have been around for quite a while. They took part and won the competition. And this band that started in the mid 1990s is sort of this punk rock band that added a bit of a new wave elements to their music. Prior to taking part in this competition, they were quite big. But upon winning the competition, they became huge. So they are currently one of the biggest bands and artists really in China. So as we have examined and established So the distinction between rock and pop is obviously not as clear anymore as it was in the early days of yaogun or Chinese rock music. And like was mentioned, so Wang Feng was the first to really bring rock to mainstream popularity, and really to in the Chinese context to really create this genre of popular rock or mainstream rock. And of course, today's China, you have a vast variety of musical genres and subgenres performed. And of course, the audience have access to essentially any type of music online. Audiences have also become much more educated in different musical genres, and the scene and its audiences have become much more fragmented than they were a few decades earlier. I also wanted to take a brief look at Chinese rock outside of China, and also to draw some comparisons between Japan and South Korea, so the other East Asian countries, when it comes to exporting their popular music or their rock music. While there have been several Chinese rock bands that have performed or toured outside of China, for instance, there was a Modern Sky Festival in Helsinki in 2015, and certain other artists have been touring outside of China. But very few artists have actually gained a following, or there hasn't really been such a big impact. So of course there is a big difference when we compare the situation to certain artists from Japan or South Korea. Of course we know these huge hits from South Korea during the past decade or so. Japanese rock music, J-rock, J-pop has been very popular at times around the world, really. But very few Chinese artists or bands have really made it. So when it comes to more of the pop end of the spectrum, there are some artists from Taiwan and Hong Kong that have had bigger audiences outside of China, but those have been primarily the overseas Chinese population. So there's still a big difference there. We can also take another example from Mongolia. So we have the band The Who has been quite popular in the recent years. They've been touring big music festivals. So especially in the metal scene, they have been quite popular. So one could then ask, why has China yet to produce this sort of a global musical hit when it comes to popular music or when it comes to rock? So of course there are probably many reasons for this. Of course, we look at South Korea, it has been a very conscious exporting effort with a lot of money poured into it, and hiring a lot of talent from other countries. For instance, there have been Finnish songwriters writing songs for South Korean artists, and so on and so forth. Whereas in China, the focus has still very much been on the domestic market, being in itself quite a big market, among other reasons, most likely. But it will be exciting to see, of course, how what the future will bring to Chinese pop music and Chinese rock music when it comes to its influence outside of China. So we just gave a brief look at Chinese rock outside of China, and now let's look briefly at Western rock music in China. So the very first international pop band really to perform in China was Wham! Back in 1985. Before this, the electronic music artist Jean-Michel Jarre, excuse my less than perfect French pronunciation, had performed in China back in 1981, so quite early on after the opening up of China around that time. And then throughout the 90s and 2000s, there were very few international bands that had the chance to perform in China. So one of the first was Deep Purple in 2004, followed by the Rolling Stones in 2006. They had been planning their Chinese concerts for quite some time, and were finally able to do it in 2006. Since then, more and more bands and artists have been able to tour China, from Nine Inch Nails to Metallica to Iron Maiden. That is, of course, prior to the pandemic, when no band or artist was able to visit China for quite some time with the very strict zero COVID policies. Post-pandemic, there have been again foreign bands that touring China. Occasionally, though, shows by international artists can get cancelled, sometimes on a short notice. And of course, in order to perform in China, you need to secure your performance permits. And some minor adjustments might be necessary, such as omitting certain songs from the set list, or having small changes to the lyrics, and so on and so forth. The next two slides are to give sort of an idea about the musical variety when it comes to mainly different types of rock music in China. So you have all of China's provinces listed with one representative band along with their musical style. So this is just something for those of you who are interested in getting a bigger picture on the Chinese music scene. You can spend some time with these two slides, and of course, internet is your friend, so you can just Google or use Spotify or YouTube or wherever you want to find more about these artists and give a listen to their songs. So this presentation and lecture has very much been focused on the music scene, the rock scene in the People's Republic of China. And we haven't really discussed Taiwan and Hong Kong. So this next slide is to give a very brief look at the music scene in Taiwan and Hong Kong. Of course, it has been following a very different routes. But if we talk about the Chinese music in sort of as a linguistic sort of an area, so of course Taiwan and Hong Kong are very much part of it. So in Taiwan there have been several very popular artists who have sort of combined pop and rock music, and these artists have also been very popular in mainland China and other places as well. Taiwanese metal has been somewhat popular around the world, so there are some Taiwanese metal bands who have been touring the world. In Hong Kong, starting from the 1960s and 70s, there were a lot of these English pop bands performing cover songs of English language pop songs. And then that was until the absolute dominance of Cantonese pop music, or Cantopop, in the 1980s. And by far the very most famous rock band or pop rock band from Hong Kong is or was Beyond. So they were formed in 1983 and finally disbanded in 2005. So they have some songs that are still extremely popular. So you'll go to any KTV, karaoke place here in China, or some live bar, you can always find someone who's singing songs by Beyond. And even though we're in Shanghai or Beijing or wherever, they usually sing it in the original Cantonese language. Very sadly, the lead singer, the original lead singer of the band, passed away at age 31, and this happened during a television show in Japan, where they also were very popular. But the band continued on after that, but of course sort of the classic phase of the band was over when the original lead singer passed away. And the other special administrative region of the People's Republic of China, Macau, have a small indie rock scene throughout the years since the 1980s. And finally, to summarize some of the topics that have been discussed here. So to an extent, with music festivals, some rock singers becoming very popular, as well as television shows like The Big Band, rock music in China has made a transition from the underground of the early times to the mainstream, which of course often means rock music also becoming closer to pop music in terms of musical style. The rock music scene itself has become much more fragmented, with several scenes within scenes, sort of for example, the metal scene being quite different from certain other sub-scenes within the rock scene. Popular music, like all popular art or any art in China, is still regulated in terms of lyrical content, and this has become somewhat more emphasized during the current leadership. And of course, most musicians do steer away from political sensitive topics to avoid trouble, but this is not always the case. Some Chinese bands have been touring outside of the country, but so far very few have gained any real big popularity abroad. All in all, there remains a very big difference compared to the popular music exports from Japan and South Korea. World tours of international bands reaching China have become more common, especially after the gradual rebound from the COVID-19 pandemic. But when it comes to performing in China, there of course remain certain restrictions. So thank you for listening to this presentation, to this lecture, and I hope you have perhaps gained some interesting knowledge and insights into the Chinese popular music and the Chinese rock music. To learn more, you can find some relevant material as part of the recommended readings for this course. And of course, as it's about music, you can use your favorite streaming platform to find out to listen to some songs of the many bands and artists that have been mentioned. A lot of material on YouTube and many other places as well. So thank you.